The Young Giant. A long time ago, a countryman had a son who was as big as a thumb, and did not become any bigger, and during several years did not grow one hair's breadth. Once, when the father was going out to plough, the little one said, "Father, I will go out with thee." "Thou wouldst go out with me?" said the father. "Stay here. Thou wilt be of no use out there. Besides, thou mightst get lost." Then Thumbling began to cry, and for the sake of peace, his father put him in his pocket and took him with him. When he was outside in the field, he took him out again and set him in a freshly cut furrow. While he was there, a great giant came over the hill. "Dost thou see that great monster?" said the father, for he wanted to frighten the little fellow to make him good. "He is coming to fetch thee." The giant, however, had scarcely taken 2 steps with his long legs before he was in the furrow. He took up little Thumbling carefully with 2 fingers, examined him, and without saying one word went away with him. His father stood by, but could not utter a sound for terror, and he thought nothing else but that his child was lost, and that as long as he lived he should never set eyes on him again. The giant, however, carried him home, suckled him, and Thumbling grew and became tall and strong after the manner of giants. When 2 years had passed, the old giant took him into the forest and wanted to try him and said, "Pull up a stick for thyself." Then the boy was already so strong that he tore up a young tree out of the earth by the roots. But the giant thought, "We must do better than that," took him back again and suckled him 2 years longer. When he tried him, his strength has increased so much that he could tear one old tree out of the ground. That was still not enough for the giant. He again suckled him for 2 years, and when he then went with him into the forest and said, "Now just tear up a proper stick for me," the boy tore up the strongest oak tree from the earth, so that it split, and that was a mere trifle to him. "Now that will do," said the giant. "Thou art perfect," and took him back to the field from whence he had brought him. His father was there following the plough. The young giant went up to him and said, "Does my father see what a fine man his son has grown into?" The farmer was alarmed and said, "No, thou art not my son. I don't want thee. Leave me." "Truly, I am your son. Allow me to do your work. I can plough as well as you, nay, better." "No, no, thou art not my son, and thou canst not plough. Go away." However, as he was afraid of this great man, he left hold of the plough, stepped back, and stood at one side of the piece of land. Then the youth took the plough and just pressed it with one hand, but his grasp was so strong that the plough went deep into the earth. The farmer could not bear to see that, and called to him, "If thou art determined to plough, thou must not press so hard on it. That makes bad work." The youth, however, unharnessed the horses and drew the plough himself, saying, "Just go home, father, and bid my mother to make ready a large dish of food, and in the meantime I will go over the field." Then the farmer went home and ordered his wife to prepare the food. But the youth ploughed the field, which was 2 acres large, quite alone, and then he harnessed himself to the harrow and harrowed the whole of the land, using 2 harrows at once. When he had done it, he went into the forest and pulled up 2 oak trees, laid them across his shoulders, and hung one harrow on them behind, and one before, and also one horse behind, and one before, and carried, all as if it had been a bundle of straw, to his parents' house. When he entered the yard, his mother did not recognize him and asked, "Who is that horrible tall man?" The farmer said, "That is our son." She said, "No, that cannot be our son. We never had such a tall one. Ours was a little thing." She called to him, "Go away, we do not want thee." The youth was silent, but led his horses to the stable, gave them oats and hay, and all that they wanted. When he had done this, he went into the parlour, sat down on the bench, and said, "Mother, now I should like something to eat. Will it soon be ready?" Then she said, "Yes," and brought in 2 immense dishes full of food, which would have been enough to satisfy herself and her husband for a week. The youth, however, ate the whole of it himself, and asked if she had nothing more to set before him. "No," she replied, "that is all we have. But it was only a taste. I must have more." She did not dare to oppose him, and went and put a huge cauldron full of food on the fire, and when it was ready, carried it in. "At length come a few crumbs," said he, and ate all there was, but it was still not sufficient to appease his hunger. Then said he, "Father, I see well that with thee I shall never have food enough. If thou wilt get me an iron staff, which is strong, and which I cannot break against my knees, I will go out into the world." The farmer was glad, put his 2 horses in his cart, and fetched from the smith a staff so large and thick that the 2 horses could only just bring it away. The youth laid it across his knee, and snap! He broke it into 2 in the middle like a beanstalk, and threw it away. The father then harnessed 4 horses, and brought a bar which was so long and thick that the 4 horses could only just drag it. The son snapped this also in twain against his knees, threw it away, and said, "Father, this can be of no use to me. Thou must harness more horses and bring a stronger staff." So the father harnessed 8 horses, and brought one which was so long and thick that the 8 horses could only just carry it. When the son took it in his hand, he broke a bit from the top of it also, and said, "Father, I see that thou wilt not be able to procure me any such staff as I want. I will remain no longer with thee." So he went away, and gave out that he was a smith's apprentice. He arrived at a village wherein lived a smith who was a greedy fellow, who never did a kindness to anyone, but wanted everything for himself. The youth went into the smithy to him, and asked if he needed a journeyman. "Yes," said the smith, and looked at him and thought, "That is a strong fellow who will strike out well and earn his bread." So he asked, "How much wages dost thou want?" "I don't want any at all," he replied. "Only every fortnight, when the other journeymen are paid, I will give thee 2 blows, and thou must bear them." The miser was heartily satisfied, and thought he would thus save much money. Next morning the strange journeyman was to begin to work, but when the master brought the glowing bar, and the youth struck his first blow, the iron flew asunder, and the anvil sank so deep into the earth that there was no bringing it out again. Then the miser grew angry and said, "Oh, but I can't make any use of thee. Thou strikest far too powerfully. What wilt thou have for the one blow?" Then said he, "I will only give thee quite a small blow, that's all." And he raised his foot and gave him such a kick that he flew away over 4 loads of hay. Then he sought out the thickest iron bar in the smithy for himself, took it as a stick in his hand, and went onwards. When he had walked for some time, he came to a small farm, and asked the bailiff if he did not require a head servant. "Yes," said the bailiff, "I can make use of one. You look a strong fellow who can do something. How much a year do you want as wages?" He again replied that he wanted no wages at all, but that every year he would give him 3 blows, which he must bear. Then the bailiff was satisfied, for he too was a covetous fellow. Next morning all the servants were to go into the wood, and the others were already up, but the head servant was still in bed. Then one of them called to him, "Get up, it is time. We are going into the wood, and thou must go with us." "Ah," said he quite roughly and surlily, "you may go just then. I shall be back again before any of you." Then the others went to the bailiff and told him that the headman was still lying in bed and would not go into the wood with them. The bailiff said that they were to awake him again and tell him to harness the horses. The headman, however, said as before, "Just go there. I shall be back again before any of you." And then he stayed in bed 2 hours longer. At length he arose from the feathers, but first he got himself 2 bushels of peas from the loft, made himself some broth with them, ate it at his leisure, and when that was done, went and harnessed the horses and drove into the wood. Not far from the wood was a raven, though which he had to pass, so he first drove the horses on, and then stopped them, and went behind the cart, took trees and brushwood, and made a great barricade so that no horse could get through. When he was entering the wood, the others were just driving out of it with their loaded carts to go home. He said to them, "Drive on, I will still get home before you do." He did not drive far into the wood, but at once tore 2 of the very largest trees of all out of the earth, threw them on his cart, and turned around. When he came to the barricade, the others were still standing there, not able to get through. "Don't you see," said he, "that if you had stayed with me, you would have got home just as quickly and would have had another hour's sleep?" He now wanted to drive on, but his horses could not work their way through, so he unharnessed them, laid them at the top of the cart, took the shafts in his own hands, and drew it over, and he did this just as easily as if it had been laden with feathers. When he was over, he said to the others, "There, you see, I have got over quicker than you," and drove on, and the others had to stay where they were. In the yard, however, he took a tree in his hand, showed it into the bailiff, and said, "Isn't that a fine bundle of wood?" Then said the bailiff to his wife, "The servant is a good one. If he does sleep long, he is still home before the others." So he served the bailiff a year, and when that was over, and the other servants were getting their wages, he said it was time for him to have his too. The bailiff, however, was afraid of the blows which he was to receive, and earnestly entreated him to excuse him from having them, for rather than that he himself would be head servant and the youth should be bailiff. "No," said he, "I will not be a bailiff. I am head servant and will remain so, but I will administer that which we agreed on." The bailiff was willing to give him whatsoever he demanded, but it was of no use. The head servant said no to everything. Then the bailiff did not know what to do, and begged for a fortnight's delay, for he wanted to find some way to escape. The head servant consented to his delay. The bailiff summoned all his clerks together, and they were to think the matter over and give him advice. The clerks pondered for a long time, but at last they said that no one was sure of his life with the head servant, for he could kill a man as easily as a midge, and that the bailiff ought to make him get into the well and clean it. And when he was down below, they would roll up one of the millstones which was lying there and throw it on his head, and then he would never return to daylight. The advice pleased the bailiff, and the head servant was quite willing to go down the well. When he was standing down below at the bottom, they rolled down the largest millstone and thought they had broken his skull, but he cried, "Chase away those hens from the well. They are scratching in the sand up there and throwing the grain into my eyes so that I can see." So the bailiff cried, "Shh, shh," and pretended to frighten the hens away. When the head servant had finished his work, he climbed up and said, "Just look what a beautiful necktie I have on." And behold, it was the millstone which he was wearing round his neck. The head servant now wanted to take his reward, but the bailiff again begged for a fortnight's delay. The clerks met together and advised him to send the head servant to the haunted mill to grind corn by night, for from thence as yet no man had ever returned in the morning alive. The proposal pleased the bailiff. He called the head servant that very evening and ordered him to take 8 bushels of corn to the mill and grind it that night, for it was wanted. So the head servant went to the loft and put 2 bushels in his right pocket and 2 in his left, and took 4 in a wallet, half on his back and half on his breast, and thus laden went to the haunted mill. The miller told him that he could grind there very well by day, but not by night, for the mill was haunted, and that up to the present time whosoever had gone into it at night had been found in the morning lying dead inside. He said, "I will manage it. Just you go away to bed." Then he went into the mill and poured out the corn. About 11 o'clock he went into the miller's room and sat down on the bench. When he had sat there a while, a door suddenly opened, and a large table came in, and on the table wine and roasted meats placed themselves, and much good food besides. But everything came of itself, for no one was there to carry it. After this the chairs pushed themselves up, but no people came, until all at once he beheld fingers which handled knives and forks and laid food on the plates, but with this exception he saw nothing. As he was hungry and saw the food, he too placed himself at the table, ate with those who were eating, and enjoyed it. When he had enough, and the others also had quite emptied their dishes, he distinctly heard all the candles being suddenly snuffed out, and as it was now pitch dark, he felt something like a box on the ear. Then he said, "If anything of that kind comes again, I shall strike out in return." And when he had received a second box on the ear, he too struck out. And so it continued the whole night. He took nothing without returning it, but repaid everything with interest, and did not lay about him in vain. At daybreak, however, everything ceased. When the miller had got up, he wanted to look after him and wondered if he were still alive. Then the youth said, "I have eaten my fill, have received some boxes on the ear, but I have given some in return." The miller rejoiced and said that the mill was now released from the spell, and wanted to give him much money as reward. But he said, "Money I will not have. I have enough of it." So he took his meal on his back, went home, and told the bailiff that he had done what he had been told to do, and would now have the reward agreed on. When the bailiff heard that, he was seriously alarmed and quite beside himself. He walked backwards and forwards in the room, and drops of perspiration ran down from his forehead. Then he opened the window to get some fresh air, but before he was aware, the head servant had given him such a kick that he flew through the window out into the air, and so far away that no one ever saw him again. Then said the head servant to the bailiff's wife, "If he does not come back, thou must take the other blow." She cried, "No, no, I cannot bear it," and opened the other window because drops of perspiration were running down her forehead. Then he gave her such a kick that she too flew out, and as she was lighter, she went much higher than her husband. Her husband cried, "Do come to me," but she replied, "Come thou to me, I cannot come to thee." They hovered about there in the air, and could not get to each other. And whether they are still hovering about or not, I do not know, but the young giant took up his iron bar and went on his way.